animals have been found thriving in Fukushima's uninhabitable radioactive zone, and they've been captured on camera images. This is similar to what's taking place in Chernobyl of Ukraine after the Chernobyl disaster in 1986. Well, the animals are returning to this radioactive zone as well. Cameras have taken images of animals and they're showing that they're thriving in Fukushima's radioactive zone. Obviously, they're also radioactive. But why is it that they're there? Carly Casella, Science Alert article says it's been nearly 9 years. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster took place after the triple whammy of the 9 magnitude earthquake, the tsunami, and the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear meltdown, and it's still a problem there. Now, the natural world has, however, wasted no time reclaiming its territory. Despite the radiation, new studies suggest that the lack of human intervention in these areas is more than enough for this wildlife to thrive. In the 5 years following the human evacuation, Fukushima evacuation zone became home to an abundant array of middle and large-sized mammals and birds. Analyzing over 267,000 wildlife images, the researchers were able to identify 20 species in this radioactive uninhabitable zone. And they include the wild boars, the Japanese hare, the macaque monkeys, pheasants, foxes, the raccoon dog, which is indigenous to Japan. It's related to the fox. And the wildlife biologist James Beasley from University of Georgia explains, he says, our results represent the first evidence that numerous species of wildlife are now abundant throughout the Fukushima evacuation zone. That's the uninhabitable zone that's radioactive. Despite the presence of radiological contamination, this suggests these species have increased in abundance following the evacuation of people. The study had an aim to focus on 3 areas around Fukushima plant. One with the highest level of contamination and no human access, of course. And another one with intermediate contamination with limited human access. And the third area was one with background radiation and open to human access. So they placed 120 cameras around each of these 3 areas. The authors sat back and waited to see what would they be able to observe. In areas where humans had been evacuated, they found no evidence that radiation impacted mammals or the bird communities. While previous researchers focused on identifying presence and health of the individual animals, this one did not aim on studying the health, but they wanted to find out the population numbers in these areas as a whole. The data, according to the scientists, provides unique evidence that human abandonment has more of an effect on animal populations than radiological exposure. It's similar to what took place in Chernobyl in 1986, which is now inhabited by brown bears, bisons, wolves, lynxes, horses, and more than 200 bird species. Animals are also returning to Fukushima in the same similar way, especially in places where there are no humans. Wild boars, for instance, were up to 4 times more abundant in the Fukushima exclusion zone compared to the area controlled by humans. And the authors write, similarly, the comparatively higher abundance of raccoons, a non-native generalist mesocarnivore, as well as the macaque monkeys, may be explained by exploitation of previously unavailable sources at the interface of rural development and the wildlands. In comparison, the radiation levels and the geography of the region showed little influence on disturbing the abundance of these species. The terrain varies from mountainous to coastal habitats, and we know these habitats support different types of species. And to account for these factors, we incorporated habitat and landscape attributes such as elevation and into our analysis. And based on these analysis, the results showed that level of human activity, elevation, and habitat type were the primary factors influencing abundance of the species evaluated, instead of the radiation levels. The only real exception was the goat-like mammal native to Japan, the sarau. Normally, this species does not like to be around humans, but on camera we found that the sarau keeps showing up close to areas that are settled by humans, around their homes. Maybe it's looking for food, obviously. The authors think it's probably because the uninhabited areas were home to an abundance of boar, which might have been enough competition to keep the sarau out. So obviously it was looking for food, that's why it was coming towards the settled areas. So the researchers, to be fair, did not, as we said before, did not examine the health of the individual species. After all, they must be radioactive as well, because they're in the exclusion zone of the radiation contamination, just like the Chernobyl animals in the exclusion radioactive zone were radioactive. But if these animals are suffering the ill effects from radiation, this does not seem to be showing up at the population level, nor does it appear to impact their abundance in long term, far from it, the study says. So that's wonderful. They're enjoying their natural habitat, but unfortunately it's still a problem with this radiation contamination. And at one point in time, of course, it usually has a problem affecting their DNA and their genes with mutations. So I'll leave a link below for you for this. Is on Science Alert. This study was published in Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment. And as we know, Fukushima is still a problem. They don't know where to store the radioactive water, and they plan on dumping it into the Pacific Ocean. As we know, the Pacific has already been contaminated. The fish industry has been affected, and with mutations and deaths of fish colonies. And this is a real problem that the world is really not dealing with. And the beautiful macaque monkeys, I'm so happy for them. They look very happy there, except for, of course, the contamination of the radiation. Now, just as we had with Chernobyl, where they had thyroid cancer incidences in Belarus, around the Kiev, Ukraine area, when residents were exposed to the Chernobyl fallout years later, we expect that obviously we have similar cases with the Fukushima radiation contamination. Just because we don't get too much news from the local authorities on this does not mean it has not taken place. And also, obviously, if they were to study the animals for radiation contamination, they would find a lot more evidence of unhealthy animals affected by the radiation, perhaps a shorter lifespan, perhaps mutation in their offspring. I would imagine that's not easy to do when these animals are themselves radioactive, for scientists to perform these kinds of experiments on them. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.